In a world brimming with knowledge and the desire to be wise, a group of devoted followers journeys with a teacher whose wisdom runs deeper than the sea. Each disciple carries an invisible cup, overflowing with their own beliefs, pride, and assumptions. But when Jesus, their master, begins to tell a story about a man with a cup too full to receive anything new, they realize that the path to true wisdom lies not in holding on but in letting go. Through storms, challenges, and humbling encounters, they learn that to be truly filled, they must first empty their hearts of everything they think they know. In the end, they discover that true strength lies not in certainty but in humility, and that sometimes the greatest journey is the one that leads within. The sun was beginning to sink behind the distant hills, casting a warm, golden glow over the land as Jesus and his disciples made their way along the dusty road to Galilee. It had been a long day filled with teachings, parables, and crowds who came from far and wide to hear the words of their master. The disciples walked close to Jesus, each lost in their own thoughts yet comforted by his presence beside them. As they traveled, they fell into an easy rhythm, talking and laughing as they recalled the events of the past days. Peter, always bold and eager, recounted a miracle Jesus had performed, his voice rising with excitement as he described the astonishment on the faces of the townsfolk. James and John, close by, occasionally interrupted with their own takes, friendly jabs and laughter creating a sense of camaraderie among the group. Yet beneath the laughter, there was an undercurrent of something more, a subtle sense of pride beginning to grow among the disciples. They each held in their hearts the knowledge that they were close to Jesus, that they were chosen, and the realization filled them with an eagerness, a desire to understand more, to know more deeply the wisdom that Jesus shared. Jesus observed this, feeling the mixture of love and pride that permeated their hearts, and he knew that the time had come to teach them a lesson about humility, a lesson that would linger in their minds long after his words had faded into the night. That evening, the group found a quiet clearing by a small stream where they set up camp. The air was cool, and the faint sound of running water mixed with the hum of insects and the rustle of leaves. After a simple meal, the disciples gathered around the small fire they had built, its warmth casting flickering shadows that danced along the trees. The mood was light, and the disciples, tired but happy, leaned back to gaze at the stars, sharing stories and laughter. Peter, as usual, took the lead, recounting his interpretations of Jesus' parables with enthusiasm, his voice filled with conviction. The others listened, sometimes nodding in agreement, other times offering their own insights, each trying to outdo the other in understanding, each eager to prove the depth of their own wisdom. As the conversation continued, a subtle competitiveness emerged. The disciples, though united by their love for Jesus, began to reveal a desire to demonstrate their understanding, to be seen as wise and learned. Jesus watched them, smiling gently, but his gaze was thoughtful. He saw that their hearts, while full of good intentions, were becoming weighed down by pride and a need to possess wisdom rather than receive it with humility. When the time felt right, he leaned forward, his voice calm and soothing, and began to speak. "Let me tell you a story about a man who once thought he knew all there was to know." The sun had barely risen when Jesus called his disciples to gather by the stream. The mist hung low over the water, creating an ethereal atmosphere that seemed to carry a quiet magic of its own. Jesus sat on a fallen log, his eyes soft and kind as he looked at each disciple in turn. "Today I want to tell you a story," he said, his voice gentle yet filled with a depth that caught their attention. "It is a story about a man and his cup." The disciples leaned in, listening intently. Jesus spoke of a man who, though wise, carried a cup that was always filled to the brim. This cup, the man believed, held all the knowledge he needed. He poured everything he learned into it, never letting it empty, always afraid that he would lose something precious if even a single drop spilled. One day, the man met a teacher who offered him a drink from a well of pure wisdom, but when he looked at his cup, he realized it was already full. The teacher advised him to empty his cup, to make room for something greater, but the man hesitated, unable to release what he had gathered. As Jesus spoke, his words hung in the morning air, each phrase sinking deeply into the disciples' hearts. They were silent, absorbing the meaning, realizing that perhaps they too were holding on to their own knowledge too tightly, unwilling to make room for what Jesus had to offer. Peter, caught between pride and humility, felt a stirring within him, a desire to understand, to release his own certainties, and to open himself to something greater. The next day the group entered a bustling marketplace in Galilee. The air was thick with the scent of spices, freshly baked bread, and the earthy aroma of market stalls displaying fruits and grains. People moved in every direction, calling out prices, haggling, laughing, and going about their day. The disciples followed Jesus through the crowd, occasionally stopping as people recognized them, eager to ask questions about Jesus' teachings. Some approached with reverence, their faces filled with hope, while others looked on with skepticism or even disdain. The disciples felt both pride and a hint of frustration, unsure of how to handle those who doubted them. At one point, a group of Pharisees passed by, casting disapproving glances, their words barely concealed as they whispered criticisms of Jesus and his followers. The disciples bristled, tempted to respond, but Jesus placed a calming hand on their shoulders, reminding them with a simple look that pride had no place in their hearts. Amidst the noise, a merchant approached Matthew, challenging him on unpaid taxes from years ago, embarrassing him before the others. Matthew felt a wave of shame and guilt, his past weighing heavily on him. Later, Jesus spoke with him in private, offering words of forgiveness and reminding him that humility begins with accepting one's own flaws. Inside the grand temple in Galilee, with its high columns, flickering oil lamps, and the scent of incense filling the air, Jesus began to teach before a small crowd. His voice was calm and steady, drawing in everyone who listened, even those who had come with doubts in their hearts. As he spoke, a scholar from among the Pharisees stood up, challenging Jesus with a question meant to trap him, his tone haughty and dismissive. The disciples tensed, prepared to defend their master, but Jesus remained unfazed. He answered the question with humility and wisdom, his words so simple yet profound that the scholar was left speechless, his own pride exposed for all to see. The disciples felt a mixture of awe and humility, recognizing in that moment that true wisdom was not about clever words or complicated theology but about the depth of understanding that came from a pure heart. John, who had always admired intelligence and wit, felt a shift within him, realizing that what he had valued was not as important as he had once believed. Outside the temple, in a small, secluded garden, Andrew sat alone, his heart heavy with self-doubt. Unlike his brother Peter, he was quieter, less outspoken, and he often felt as though he faded into the background. As he watched the shadows lengthen in the garden, he thought about the man with the full cup, and for the first time, he wondered if he had kept his own heart too tightly closed, afraid to reveal his insecurities. Jesus found him there, sitting among the flowers, and gently sat beside him. They spoke in hushed tones, Andrew confessing his fears, his sense of inadequacy, his struggle with feeling overshadowed by his brother's boldness. Jesus placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and told him that greatness was not measured by volume or strength but by a heart willing to serve, a heart open to love and humility. Andrew felt the words sink into his soul, bringing him a quiet peace he hadn't known before, a peace that filled the empty spaces in his heart. The Sea of Galilee stretched before them, calm and serene as the disciples climbed into a boat, setting out across the water. The journey began peacefully, the gentle rhythm of the waves lulling them into a sense of security. But as they neared the center, a sudden storm erupted, the wind whipping the waves into furious crests, rain pouring down, lightning flashing across the darkened sky. Panic set in as the disciples fought to keep the boat steady, their shouts and cries filling the air. In their desperation they turned to Jesus, only to find him calm, unshaken by the storm. With a single word, he stilled the waters, the silence that followed echoing in their minds as they struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed. Jesus looked at them, his eyes filled with love and compassion, reminding them that true faith required letting go of pride, letting go of control, and trusting in something greater than themselves. The disciples, drenched and humbled, felt a newfound respect for the strength that came from humility. As they continued their journey, they arrived at a village by the sea, where they encountered a man known for his knowledge, a man who carried himself with an air of pride. He approached the disciples, laughing at their simple ways, questioning their wisdom with scorn. Jesus spoke kindly to him, sharing the parable of the empty cup, but the man only scoffed, unwilling to let go of his own certainty. The disciples watched in silence, recognizing in the man's arrogance a reflection of their own struggles, the pride they had once held so dearly. They saw the futility of clinging to knowledge without humility and felt a deepened sense of gratitude for the lesson Jesus had shared with them. As the sun began to set over the hillside, casting long shadows across the land, Jesus gathered his disciples for a final reflection. They sat together, the golden light illuminating their faces, each carrying a sense of transformation. Jesus invited them to share what they had learned, and one by one they spoke, recounting their struggles, their revelations, their journey from pride to humility. Some shared stories of moments when they had felt small, others confessed fears and doubts they had harbored, each pouring out their hearts as they embraced the lesson of the empty cup. Jesus listened, his gaze filled with love as they opened themselves fully, each discovering the beauty of humility. With the first light of dawn, Jesus led them to the shores of the Sea of Galilee. The water was still, the air filled with the soft calls of morning birds. Standing on the shore, Jesus gave his final message, a gentle reminder to carry with them the lesson of the empty cup, to face the world with open hearts, humble and willing to learn. The disciples, feeling a mixture of joy and sadness, embraced the wisdom they had gained, realizing that their journey was only beginning. As they watched the sun rise, they knew they were changed, each carrying within them a newfound commitment to humility, ready to share Jesus' message of love and openness with the world. This is end of the story. Comment amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.